Yo, what's up, family, man? Welcome to week 5, day 3. Happy Friday to you guys. I appreciate you guys getting on and doing your work, and I really enjoyed seeing all of your faces this week on our Zoom meetings, man. And I hopefully will see you all again next week on our Zoom meetings when we resume on Monday with first period, and then Tuesday and Wednesday. So anyway, man, I'm just gonna ask that you guys, when you watch this video, like you really learn from me because I'm talking about a lot of stuff in this video. But yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first question is, use a thermometer above, right? So we see the thermometers. Read them closely and identify the proper set of temperatures, right? So there's different temperature sets. And so when we read the thermometer, we'll see that the first one is 1. Oops. And then the second one goes down to -2 as we read it. And then the third one goes to 3.5, right? And then the fourth one goes to zero point 0.5, right? So those are all of the thermometer readings. And if we look at the responses, that is the second circle, 1, -2, -3.5. Nope, that is not that's the third one. 1, -2, 3.5, and -5, -0.5. zero point 0.5. All right, so all of those answers should be the third bubble. All right. So if we look at the one for letter E, for number 2, we're filling those in starting from the bottom all the way to the top. So it looks like that's -20. So number 2 is going to be, looks like maybe skip counting by 5. So -15, and then -10. And then we skip -5, and we should get to 0, and then 5. Skip 10 and do 15, and then 20. So these are all the numbers, focus, 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 that should be filled in. So if we look at that for number 2, that looks like that might be the second bubble. Okay. All right. Number 3. Now, we've been talking a lot about negative numbers in our last video. We talked about negative numbers. And so we have to think about, like, just remember the number line, right? So if we look at number 3, if we think about a number line, it says on one morning, the temperature in Phoenix, Arizona was 8 degrees Celsius. So that means it was at above 0, 8 degrees. And then the temperature in Portland, Maine was 12 degrees cooler, or it was colder by 12 more degrees. So when we think about the number line, right, we draw a number line, and let's say that this is 8. So since it's cooler, we have to go down, right? We have to go down to 12. So that means we're going to cross over 0, and then we go over 1, 2, 3, 4. So we go from down 8 to 0, and then 4 more to 12. So that will be -4. So that should be the first bubble, which is -4 degrees. Okay, so whenever you get stuck, just think about drawing out a number line. All right. Number 4. That one says 2 opposite numbers are 4 units away from each other. What are the numbers? So when we think about the term opposite numbers, we have -4 and 4. Those are considered opposite numbers. But it says the 2 opposite numbers are 4 units away from each other. So when you think about -4, and then -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? How many total units is that? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So when you think about the opposite number and they're 4 units away from each other, right? How many away from 0 are they? Right? So you could take that number and just times it by 2, and that's going to be -8 and 8. -8 and 8 would be 4 units away from each other compared to 0. Okay? So you have to remember that when we think about opposites and how many distance the way they are from each other from 0, because we're going to be talking about that when we talk about absolute value. All right? So number 5, excuse me. Two opposite numbers are 7 units away from each other. So again, when we think about 7 units away from each other, when you double that number, just like we did with 4 to get 8, we double the number to get 7, and 3.5, right, is half of 7. So they're both 3.5 units away from 0, which means that they're a total of 7 units away. Okay, so that's why that one is 3.5. So you'll have negative 3.5. Oopsies, I can't see over my camera. Negative 3.5 and 3.5. Okay, so that's going to give us a total of 7 units away. All right. So here we see the example of the positive and negative number line as we look, and it says, would 5 degrees above 0 be positive or negative? And remember, we talked about that in our lesson yesterday. But when we think about a number line, whether it be going this way or this way, right? It doesn't matter. Anything above 0 is always positive, right? And then anything this way to the right is always positive. Okay, so we have to remember that when we draw out our number lines, okay? Anything above 0 is always positive. Anything to the right of 0 is always positive. Anything below 0 is always negative, okay? So 5 degrees above would be positive, all right? Number 7, what would the opposite of the opposite this number would be? So I have to rewrite that because that's not proper, but the opposite of the number. So when we think about the opposite of the opposite, right, we have to remember this, right? So this is number 7, guys, number 7, and it says, what is the opposite of the opposite? So when you write the opposite, remember we talked about anytime there's like this space right here, this next to it, right, we always can say that's like an imaginary 1. Right? And that's a way to remember that too. So I'm going to show you this way and I'm going to show you another way. But this way right here is like saying -1, even though there's no negative or there's no number 1 next to it. It's really written like this. Right? It's really written like that. We can always just say that that's like -1. And we know that a negative times a negative, because parentheses means multiplication, negative times a negative is always a positive, right? So the opposite of the opposite, right? The opposite of the opposite is always positive. Say that with me. The opposite of the opposite is always positive. Or, right, we could take a look at it like this, right? Whenever we see this, all we have to do is just make it a plus sign. Just stretch them together. Now it looks like a plus sign or a T or whatever you want to call it. But you can definitely just say that anytime you see the negative next to the negative like that in parentheses, or even like this. Sometimes you might see it like this, right? Either way, you know that this is going to become positive. It's going to become positive because the opposite of the opposite is always positive. All right, so that's why that is 9, because the number in parentheses is -9. We find the opposite of it, which would be 9. The opposite of the opposite is always positive. You're going to need to recall that when you do these next few problems, okay? All right, moving right along, you guys. This might not be a long video after all. So let's look at number 8. And I hope you have your pencil and paper out as you do this, so you can always write the problems out. Okay, so we have -18 minus the opposite of 6 minus the opposite of 16 plus the opposite of 19. Okay? So just like we did in that example, right, you can rewrite it by going through and changing all of the opposites to plus signs. All right, so we'll just rewrite it. So that's going to be negative 18 plus 6 plus 16 plus negative 19. So when you rewrite it, it should look just like that. You see how this converted? The opposite of the opposite is always positive. Opposite of the opposite is always positive. Positive stayed, okay? Now, as I read from left to right, I'm going to do what I see first. So since the signs are different, remember we talked about that. Since the signs are different, I'm going to subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. The bigger number is 18 in this case, since I'm doing these two numbers. So 18 take away 6 is 12. So I'm going to keep the sign of negative 12. Because if you think about on a number line, you're starting at negative 18, and then you're adding 6 more. So that means you're moving closer to 0 when you're adding, because you're going towards the positive 6. Okay, so that's why that's going to land on negative 12. Now I bring everything else down. Okay, and it looks like that, right? Now, as I read from left to right, I'm going to do negative 12 plus 16. Okay, so again, I'm going towards the plus 16. So that means I'm going to move 16 spaces over. So in essence, my signs are different. So I'm just going to subtract. 16 take away 12 is 4. And I'm going to keep the sign of the bigger number. So that is now going to be 4. And then I bring down plus negative 19. Okay. Plus negative 19. And now I'm back to different signs again. Different signs, because you know that's positive 4. 4 plus negative 19. My signs are different. I'm going to subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number, which is 19. So that's going to be negative 15. And now I am done. Okay. All right. Again, just like PEMDAS, we have our little pyramid, just bringing everything else down, remembering everything that I've already done. All right. Nicely done. Now let's do number 9. Pretty simple, right? Pretty simple. Number 9. All right, so number 9 says, right, I'm just going to rewrite it. I have 7 opposite of the opposite of 12 plus opposite of 9 plus 17. Okay, so again, I know that the opposite of 12 is always going to be what? That's right, positive. So I rewrite it as 7 plus 12 plus opposite of 9 plus 17. Okay? Now, as I read from left to right, I'm going to do 7 plus 12. That's going to give me 19. It's going to give me 19. And then I bring down my negative 9 plus 17. Now, as I read from left to right, I'm going to do 19 minus 9. 19 minus 9, right? Signs are different, so just subtract. 19 minus 9 is going to give me 10, plus 17 is going to give me 27. Okay, see that? All right, so far so good. We just have to remember that the opposite of the opposite is always positive. Okay, all right, last one, guys. Last one. You guys are doing great, and I really do appreciate those of you that go back and do the work again to make sure that you get all the questions correct. I really do appreciate those efforts, and I just appreciate those of us that are just doing it and getting it done. So, you know, I hope you retain it, but I appreciate you doing it nonetheless. All right, so we're going to rewrite number 10. I didn't include a bonus question. That's what's missing. That's okay. All right. So 17 plus the opposite of 5 minus the opposite of 15 minus the opposite of 18. Okay. All right, so by now you should know to do 17 plus, right? And then this becomes the opposite of the opposite becomes positive, and then the opposite of the opposite becomes positive. All right, now I just read from left to right, and then I have to do what right here? All right, so that should give us what? Very good. Okay, plus 15 plus 18. All right, just do that right there. That's going to give us 27 plus 18, right? And then 8 and 7 is 15, 2 and 1 is 3, plus 1 more is 45. And there we have it. There we have it. That's it. Easy peasy for Friday, you guys. So I really want you guys to continue to focus on your hard work, man. Continue to, show up to the Zoom meetings and, like continue to do the best you can while we're here. Next week is going to be a little bit more challenging. All right. So I'm going to ask that you recall everything that you've learned this week and carry it over to next week. Again, if you want to do extra math, you can hit me up for the code for Delta Math, but it's really not a big deal. But yeah, man, that's it for now. You guys did a great job. I appreciate you. So I look forward to seeing you guys on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend. Peace.